Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Let's Get Crafty. And today we're covering the craftiest of crafting cards of all, Master Engravers. Now you might be thinking, is it even worth talking about Master Engravers? It's just a good card, right? It just gives extra points. Well, the difficult decision of this card, and it's going to affect every faction differently, is that whether or not you even invest in crafting it in the first place is going to vary on the game state, and that's what we're going to discuss at great length today. The reason that I wanted to start with the item crafting video is because I think that knowing the item crafting costs is prerequisite knowledge to understanding the nitty-gritty of this card really well. So before we get fully started, I just wanted to point out I got a very interesting comment on my item video by Peppermint Productions. They said, boots, bags, and crossbows are generally worse than swords, since they cost 2 cards and 2 crafting pieces for 2 victory points, instead of 1 card and 2 crafting pieces for 2 victory points, which is what it would be if you crafted the sword. And this is completely valid. Thank you for the comment, Peppermint Productions. So if you are the Woodland Alliance, this makes perfect sense, because you generally have enough crafting pieces to get exactly what you want. So if I'm holding onto the sword, great, I'll gladly craft it for 2 points, discard the 1 card, and then all my leftover cards get put to use, like I could mobilize them or train an officer or something. But it starts to break down a little bit when you're talking about factions that have more limited crafting, like the Marquise de Cat or the Corvids, where we're not so focused on getting value out of every single card, right? We might have a card in our hand that just stays there for a few turns, and we're a little bit more choosy about our crafting pieces. Oh, am I gonna put a crafting piece in Fox? Or is it more worthwhile to get a second rabbit or get a primary mouse crafting piece, for example? So different factions are gonna evaluate that question a little bit differently. But it's a very valid point. So just so you know, I do read the comments. And if you post something and I think it's insightful, worth adding to one of my videos just to give it a shout, I will do so. So without any further ado, let's get started with our discussion of Master Engravers. Taking a look at the card, it is a mouse-suited card, naturally, and there is a crafting cost of 2 mouse crafting pieces. And what it does is whenever you craft an item, right, not a persistent effect, it has to be an item, you score an extra point. Now, this is really good, because think about how impactful it is when you craft a T. You get 2 victory points right off the bat. It feels good. And crafting a boot or a bag or a crossbow doesn't always feel that impactful or that dramatic, but it's still important. Well, now every time you craft one of those small ticket items, it's now the equivalent of a T. Or craft a single T with Master Engravers, oh my goodness, you've just got 3 victory points. That's the same level of punch as crafting the coins, of course. And crafting coins? 4 victory points? Are you kidding? That's nuts. So it feels really great every time you craft an item. And even if you only craft a single item after you craft this card for 1 extra victory point, it's 1 victory point. It's 1 victory point you didn't have. So it seems like a no-brainer kind of card where there's not really a decision to be made. You craft this card, of course. Well, it is going to depend on that question that we were talking about before that Peppermint Production brought up, and that's the variability in crafting ability. So let's do a little bit of an overview. There is only 1 copy of this card in all of the Exiles and Partisans deck. Now, that means that if you don't start with this card in your hand, you can't really rely on drawing it. It's a little bit different when it comes to a card that has twice the number of copies, like Swap Meet or League of Adventurous Mice, where you can put a crafting piece and think, on the off chance I grab one of those, it'll be worth crafting. Master Engravers, the chances of you drawing it are very slim unless your card wealth is ridiculous, like the Riverfolk Company or the Badgers. You can't really hope realistically that you're just going to draw this card by chance. So that's part of the thinking, is that you don't invest in the hope unless you are physically holding it in your hand. So something to consider. And like I talked about before, it's extra points. Just really good, right? In a point racing game, assuming you're not going for dominance, this is just unambiguously very important. However, it does rely on having good and consistent crafting ability. So if you're the type of faction that's, only going to craft 1 or 2 items over the course of the game, crafting this beforehand and then crafting those items might be a bit of a tall order. But a faction like the Woodland Alliance or, the Riverfolk Company that crafts a lot of different items is going to get more value than a low crafting faction. No surprise there. Now, the earlier you get this, the better. That's because unlike League of Adventurous Mice, which allows you to retroactively get use of your already crafted items, Master Engravers doesn't. Master Engravers only gives you more points with all the items you craft going forward. So if you've already got 3 items in your crafted items box and then get Master Engravers, well, you can't look back. You can't just say, if only I had crafted it first. It doesn't always work that way. You just don't get value for your already crafted items. So something to keep in mind, the earlier you can get this, the better it's going to be. And the crafting cost is actually really high for this card. You might think, well, it's the same as a sword or a coins, right? That have 2 of a single suit. But because of the breakdown of items, it doesn't work out exactly that way. And that's because, unlike Rabbit and Fox, there are many cards that you can get that require 2 Rabbit. All of the coins require 2 Rabbit, and you've got Coffin Makers, which is a card we'll talk about a little bit later. For Fox, 2 Fox crafting pieces gets you the swords, and it gets you Eyrie and Gray if you can draw it, or it can give you Informants. We'll get to that one. But when it comes to Master Engravers having 2 mouse crafting pieces, there's no item that requires having 2 mouse crafting pieces. Every mouse item, the bags and the root tea, you can get with a single mouse crafting piece. So that second one really only enables you to craft 2 cards in the deck. It's different in the base deck because there's Scouting Party and Favor of the Mice, but we're talking about in the Exiles and Partisans deck. There's only this card and Murine Broker that are unlocked by having 2 mouse crafting pieces. So generally speaking, a second mouse crafting piece is a big investment. And depending on your faction, it's going to make it pretty obvious to the table, why did you just build that second mouse workshop? Oh, they must have Master Engravers or Murine Broker. When that isn't necessarily the case for someone who goes and places a second Rabbit crafting piece or a second Fox crafting piece. So just something to keep in mind, and that's why I wanted to cover the items first. Its Sabo ability is high. If you have this card and you don't have a Saboteur's card, there's a good chance it's not going to last very long. Of course, that's going to vary. If you're all the way in last place, people probably aren't too worried about you because it doesn't enable you to do more. But if you're sitting in the 20-point range, no matter what faction you are, this thing is getting axed because it can, on a final turn, if you're able to craft 2 items, that's enough to really get you a lot closer to that finish line. And it can be scary if someone has this card and has even semi-decent crafting capability. So yeah, be careful. If you have a Saboteur's card, it might be worth crafting that in addition, just as a safeguard to protect Master Engravers. So let's get into the faction by faction analysis, starting with, as always, the Marquise de Cat. Now, if you've played a lot of cats, you know that the cats are not necessarily the best at crafting a lot. Sometimes I've played some games where I only ever got 1 workshop, the one I placed at setup, and that was the only workshop I had the entire game. So making the decision to actively go for another mouse in order to craft this card is a big decision, and it's going to cut off a lot of paths that we could take in another direction, right? Wouldn't you say that a single mouse and also a fox or a rabbit would be a better investment? That way you can maybe get boots or hammer or false orders or charm offensive or something like that. So getting a second mouse is a decision when it comes to the cats. right? It's very inconvenient to get a second mouse workshop. And like I said, it's very telegraphed that you're crafting either this or Murine Broker. There's not really any other reason in the Exiles and Partisans deck to get that second mouse workshop. And for those reasons, I am going to rate it a C. If I happen to draw this card, even if I start with this card in my hand upon setup as the Marquise de Cat, I don't think that this is a prerogative for me to get, because if I make the investment in getting all the way to the point where I can craft Master Engravers, which is going to take 2, maybe 3 turns to get those workshops in place, even then, the odds of me getting those boots and tea in order to get the value from Master Engravers is pretty low. By that point, some of them are probably going to be gone already. And you might say, well, what about going and getting the boots or the crossbow or things like that in order to get the value? Well, that requires getting a third workshop. And if you play a lot of cats, well, you know that you can't really be that choosy with your buildings. A lot of the time, it's just going to be another sawmill or the third recruiter or something. So I just don't think that it's that good of a card. You can put in all that effort and maybe get 1 extra victory point. I think this card is just better spent on field hospitals. I'll gladly spend this card to save even a single cat and bring it back to my keep. So I don't rate this very highly, but if it works out, give it a try. We'll see. Next up is the Eyrie Dynasties. Now, unlike the cats, a second mouse roost is pretty manageable. It's pretty easy, depending on the path and the suit layout, to just go, and it's pretty innocuous too. The table's not going to notice, oh, you went and chose to get a second mouse roost. It could just be that it was the one on the way, and so you can craft this card as a surprise, and the table might not anticipate it the way that they will for the cats. So for that reason, it's just a lot more likely that the Eyrie Dynasties is going to be in a good position to craft this in the first place. And what you're probably already thinking is that it negates the disdain for trade. So if you're any leader besides the builder, right, despot, charismatic, your standard of item crafting is no matter what, you're going to get 1 victory point. So now, if you craft a tea, you're getting normal income from it. If you craft a sword or a hammer, you're still going to get your normal allotment of 2 victory points. But better than that, now those easy to craft items like the bags and the boots, well, now you're going to get 2 victory points just like anyone else would for having this card. So part of the design of the Eyrie is that it's a really strong faction. It's very aggressive, so they tend to get lots of points from battles. They had to kind of nerf them a little bit to cut back their strength by giving them disdain for trade. So with Master Engravers, you're essentially undermining one of the core weaknesses of the faction, and that's really strong. And of course, it's going to help you capitalize on your moderate crafting capabilities. I think that it says moderate crafting on the Eyrie Dynasties board. I think they're actually pretty good. The thing that holds them back is their card wealth, of course, because you're always putting 1 card into the decree. But they're actually pretty decent crafters, especially if you get some kind of card economy advantage where you're drawing extra. So be on the lookout for that if you also happen to get Master Engravers. I think that this is a very strong card. Oh, and Builder Jim. So if you're unaware, the meme of using the Builder is just that. It's a meme, and I don't think that this necessarily incentivizes you to choose the Builder just because you have this card, because, yeah, the Builder is gonna be maybe able to get a bunch of points all at once from the items in addition to Master Engravers, but for reasons that you might be aware of if you watch Nebuchadnezzar's Eyrie guide, which I'll link in the description. It's very good. The Builder's just not going to give you the same value as the Despot in most cases, and it's not like this synergizes with the Builder any better than it synergizes with any of the other leaders. All of them are going to be getting +1 points for their items. It's just that Builder Jim is going to give you 1 extra point for a tea or a sword, or 2 extra for the coins, which you were going to get anyway, even if you didn't have Master Engravers. So that's just all there is to it. So I think this is an A tier card for the Eyrie Dynasties. It's much better than it is for the Cats because Eyrie Dynasties have that sort of ability to get lots of crafting pieces, meaning that the high crafting cost of this card is not as much of a problem for them. Woodland Alliance. So this is the example I was giving in the intro for a high crafting faction. So you can get huge value from this card if you're the Woodland Alliance, because how many times have you seen it? Woodland Alliance crafts 4 or 5 items in the game. Imagine having 5 extra victory points if they got Master Engravers early. It's the potential is insane for this. So I will say resist the temptation of crafting it too soon, because if you are a frequent Woodland Alliance player, you'll know that it can be a big, tense decision of, oh man, I want to craft this. I can craft such a good card on turn 1, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and mobilize the card, because overall, I'm going to say this, I'm probably going to repeat it, getting a base as soon as possible is more important than any crafted improvement. I will, put that in writing. Getting a base on turn 2 or as soon as possible is more important than any crafted improvement you can get. So do not craft this card if it means not getting you that base and mobilizing the card that you need to. So keep that in mind, but oh man, if you can get this after you get the base or in addition to the turn you get the base, do it. It is very strong because, as you've probably seen many times, the Woodland Alliance can often win the game by getting a bunch of sympathy, and it's usually associated with 1 or 2 item crafts, a lot of the times the coins or tea or something, and just jumping to the finish line. Well, the Woodland Alliance can often win the game from 17 or 18 points, but I would say if they have Master Engravers, drop that down to 14 or something like that. They can really burst with this card. So if they craft it, get rid of it. Saboteur it, do what you got to do, because it is an S tier craft for the Woodland Alliance. I said it. So, Vagabond. Hey, this faction already likes crafting items. Shouldn't this be great? Well, yeah, in theory, until, again, that question of crafting cost comes up. It requires 2 of your hammers to craft. Obviously, you have to be in a mouse clearing, but that's not that hard for the Vagabond. But exhausting 2 of your hammers to get a crafted improvement is a lot. Now, I would say exhausting 2 hammers to craft 1 or 2 items is very different, because those items that you're getting immediately add to your action economy, so crafting items is almost action neutral. But crafting an improvement requires refreshes that aren't going to benefit you again immediately until later. And if you don't have the tea, you're refreshing 3 items and you're exhausting 2 of those 3 refreshed items this turn to craft Master Engravers. So yeah, it can be, when you put it that way, it's a little bit less appealing, right? And the other thing about the Vagabond is that even though you see them crafting quite a bit, they have very low card wealth unless they have the coins, like our friend the Vagrant, or if they're getting particularly good luck with their questing. So they do a quest here and there, and then they get 2 cards, and then they draw an evening. That's the only time you see Vagabonds without coins get really early card wealth, where they're probably going to actually have some items to craft. So sure, you can spend 2/3 of your early turns without tea to craft this, but then for most of the game, you're probably only going to be drawing 1 card per turn. So how many items are you actually going to be able to craft from that point on for the bonus point? The one advantage to this is, I would say, if you ever get a tea and it's not that expensive for you to craft this card, of course it also requires having 2 hammers, which is a whole other question, but your hammers are now essentially wild crafting pieces, because you can get coins and then slip into a clearing that's rabbit, craft the coins, and then move and in the next turn, and then craft a sword. So you don't have this locked, fixed crafting piece. You're moving around, and your hammers are essentially rainbow depending on where you happen to be standing. So that is an upside to getting this card. So I would say it's A rating, provided that it's not that expensive for you to get. Once you actually get this card, it's very, very strong for the Vagabond because they will probably craft 2 or 3 items from that point on. But it's just the getting the card that's a lot. And so I would say don't bother if you don't have a T. That's all there is to it. You're too tight on your action refreshes every turn without a T. Next up is the Lizard Cult. So this is very convenient to craft, right? Because lizards already want to have 2 gardens, 2 crafting pieces of a given suit. 1 is pretty much pointless unless you're crafting an item or something. But 2 is kind of the normal thing for lizards to have, right? So we're going to have 2 rabbit, 2 fox, 2 mouse, optimistically. So crafting is not going to be a problem, provided that the outcast lines up when we actually have this card. Now, here's what I'm going to say, and this is something that it only occurred to me after I thought about it for a little bit, that should you craft this card or should you score this card, right? If you have another mouse card, no question. Score with that card and craft this one, right? Because lizards can craft quite a few items if they have good card draw and good luck. But if you don't have another mouse card in your hand, this is the only card, should you score it or craft it? And I would say it's better to score it. You might think that's crazy, but think about it this way. If you, give away the game there. If you craft this card, instead of scoring it, you're depriving yourself of 2 victory points. Well, in order to get that value back, you then have to craft 3 items. That way you're getting the 3 victory points that you should have had from score in order to make that trade worthwhile. Well, what if you don't craft those 3 items? Maybe you craft 2, okay, you broke even. Or you craft 1, well, now you've lost value by not scoring this card. So just something to keep in mind, that only craft this card if you have already scored mouse this turn, all right? But if you can do that, S tier. Lizards need every point they can get, and they are fairly good at crafting items if you actually have some good card draw that you can not only hold on to item cards, but you can also influence the outcast. You say, ooh, well, I'm going to discard these 2 rabbits, and that way on my next turn, I can get a 4-point coin. Hee hee. So, very good card for the lizards. Love it. Riverfolk Company. Now, Riverfolk might be the highest item crafting faction in the game. So naturally, they get mega value from every single item that they craft from that point. However, kind of like with the Marquise de Cat, the choice of spending 2 of your funds, giving them back to the owner or putting them in the supply in order to open up a second mouse crafting slot on your board, it's a big investment, right? Every time you place a trading post, it should be something that serves the purpose of crafting, right? There's no point in getting a 3rd rabbit early game unless you're playing with the base deck and you're trying to pull off a favor. But generally, you want to follow the pattern of place a trade post to get a first mouse, then a second rabbit, or a first rabbit, then a second rabbit, and then maybe a first fox. That way you can craft every item in the game, save swords. And then after that point, maybe if you get a sword, a second fox is good. But a second mouse is not usually something that you see the Riverfolk actively try to do unless they're only putting it there for the purposes of crafting 2 separate mouse items or just because they need that warrior in that spot. So think about that you're probably not going to get much use out of the second mouse crafting piece after that point, or I should say crafting slot on the board. But if you do that and you get a second mouse trade post and then craft this card, which of course is part of your action economy for the turn, you have to commit funds to it, you can now upcharge for items. Before you were saying, oh, come on, anyone want to buy this boot? Anyone want to buy this bag? And you would probably sell it for 2 or something like that and maybe not even make the sale. But once you have Master Engravers, every item is way more powerful. So now your opponents are going to be a little bit more scared of letting you keep the items. So you can change the price to maybe 3, or depending on the item, maybe root T, you can set the prices to 4, and you might even still get paid for that. So it will make your crafting and your item cards more valuable. Hence, opponents might be more incentivized to deny you your crafting and have no choice but to pay you. So pretty interesting little social interaction there. Not a rules interaction, but a meta social little rule. So I think this is A tier. You might think, wait, shouldn't it be S tier? I just think that a faction like the Lizard Cult that crafts way more easily things that have 2 mouse crafting cost, that synergizes a little bit better with the engine versus Riverfolk Company that have to get a second mouse crafting piece and then commit 2 of their funds. It's a big investment, but it's still good enough to rank as an A. Next up is the Underground Duchy. Ooh, well, as you might know, the Duchy is fairly good at crafting items depending on the play group that you're with. Now, the group that I happen to play with a lot, a second mouse building is going to get punished. If I put down a second building in mouse, it's pretty obvious that I'm crafting Master Engravers or Murine Broker, just like the cats. But unless you have 8+ warriors defending it, you're probably going to get that battled away and then suffer the price of failure. So just consider whether or not this is actually worth the aggression that you're going to face depending on your playgroup. Some playgroups might actually not punish you and just let you craft this with impunity. You're probably going to win that game. So go for it if you have uninteractive opponents that kind of just focus on themselves. But if you're playing with advanced opponents, you might want to think twice about this card. So it is very good for endgame bursts because you can surprise people. If you have revealed it over and over again, they're going to have to put that into their calculus of, oh wait, the moles have Master Engravers, they can craft it and then craft other things, right? Because the Underground Duchy is really good at endgame bursts. Imagine this, you have 1 building maybe, you can go and build twice in order to get 2 crafting pieces. Then in your evening, craft Master Engravers, and then maybe craft 2 other items with some other buildings that you just got, because the Duchy can pretty easily drop a bunch of buildings with the Formal and the Mayor and some of their daylight actions, pick them back up and immediately craft them. And of course you would craft Master Engravers as the first thing that turn. I've seen it happen where someone crafts it and then immediately crafts 2 other items and just wins. So very strong for endgame, but investing in any type of crafting early is risky. And that's why I do think it's a C tier card, just because of the high crafting cost and the fact that you're just revealing your hand over and over again so opponents can see what you're doing pretty easily. Next up is the Corvid Conspiracy. So extra points, very needed. Corvids are, of course, one of the weakest factions in the game, if not the weakest. I don't know, depends on how ad set changed their meta, but every single point will be needed because every time you score an extra point for an item craft with Master Engravers, that's less reliance that you're going to have on plotting and flipping, right? As you know, for Corvids, it can be really hard to flip a bunch of plots and get points that way. But if you craft a bunch of items, that reduces your necessity for excessive plotting. So that second mouse plot is somewhat costly, like with the Marquise de Cat and the Riverfolk Company, but it's not too bad, right? Sometimes you'll see the Corvids plot somewhere just because they happen to have an accumulation of warriors. It's not that suspicious if they get a second mouse crafting piece, but some clever opponents might still pay attention to that and say, whoa, we should probably get rid of that plot because they could craft Master Engravers. And, of course, just like how more item points makes you less plot reliant, it also makes you less battle reliant. So you won't have to engage in as many battles if you're able to compensate your point engine with items. So it is going to require cards, though. And this means that you're probably also not going to exert quite as often, right? If I have Master Engravers, my plan is probably going to be move, plot, maybe plot again, and then don't exert. Just draw those cards to make sure that we're funneling items, potential items into our hand to make sure we're getting value out of this Master Engravers. Sometimes you have to exert, but we don't really love doing it. It doesn't synergize well with Master Engravers. And so I think it is an A tier card for Corvid Conspiracy, potentially S. I just think that Corvids can be very easily denied a second mouse plot, because you'll put it down and someone will just say, well, all we have to do is go and expose, because that second plot is probably for the purposes of crafting something good. So next up is Lord of the Hundreds. Now, item crafting was already good. That's why they had to nerf it with contempt for trade. Disdain for trade is the birds. They had to give them the ability of contempt for trade, because otherwise getting an item and adding to your hoard, your action economy, and then getting points would just be too much. Well, now you can both take the item and still score a point, right? This is an extra point. So even if you're crafting an item and taking 0 points, this is an extra point on top of the 0. So you're always going to get the +1 for Master Engravers as the rats. But of course, if you craft the coins, sometimes you decide, I think I'll rather take those points instead of the actual physical item into my hoard, and then you're getting full value +1. Huge, right? Lord of the Hundreds, of course, has a very slow scoring pace, so every point that you get from alternate sources, like battles or crafting, will add up, right? The only thing is, the Lord of the Hundreds has notoriously low crafting power because of their notoriously low card draw. So that does mean we might end up needing to use our Rowdy mood every now and then, just to have that be an alternate so that you can draw more cards and maybe craft more items and build more strongholds. Because the more strongholds we have, the more potential for crafting we have if we happen to, draw our 1 card per turn and hey, look at that. It's a card I can craft because I was set up with 3 strongholds. So you might want to think about potentially being ready to craft whatever you can craft, especially if you already have Master Engravers. So I think it's a B tier card. It's nice, but sometimes with the Lord of the Hundreds, you do have to be very particular with where you put your strongholds, because every stronghold is going to matter, both for, of course, warrior regeneration and crafting. Lord of the Hundreds can't craft all that much, but you want to craft what you can. So am I really going to go and get a second mouse crafting piece? They're going to see that coming pretty much a mile away, because every stronghold that the Lord of the Hundreds places is probably for some type of reason. Okay? And the last one is the Keepers in Iron. Now, just like with the Corvids, that the more points you get from items reduces your reliance on plots, which is otherwise your primary scoring tactic. The more points we can get from item crafting means the less reliance we're going to have on relics. And this means we might not have to venture that far away from our homeland in order to win the game, right? Just craft a tea and a sword here and there, and all of a sudden that's an extra 6 points. Well, that's 2 relics we didn't have to get because we were crafting items. So think about that next time you play the Keepers in Iron. It's a tricky faction, but it's I've gone back and forth on the need to craft every item you can with the Keepers in Iron, and now I'm on the fence. I once said that you should not really focus on item crafting because the cards are more important for your engine. Now I'm thinking that the cards that get you 2 points or more are more worth it. But with this card, Master Engravers, every item gets you 2 points or more. So can be very, very helpful for speeding up your endgame burst, right? And like other factions, 2 mouse crafting pieces, like having 2 way stations in a mouse clearing, could actually be part of your normal strategy. It's not going to come across as strange to have a second mouse crafting piece. Just remember that you can't encamp twice in the same clearing in one turn. You can encamp and get a way station in a clearing, and then on a following turn you can encamp again, assuming of course you have an open building slot. So yeah, just keep that in mind. And it's still the Badgers though, right? So we are still very card sensitive. So just because you have this card doesn't mean you should go ham and just only focus on crafting and become a crafting engine, because we're still going to need a good amount of spending cards for recruitment and making sure that our retinue is fully stuffed. But if coins fall into your hand after this point, you should think about crafting those. especially if you've got Master Engravers. So I think it is an A tier card for the Keepers in Iron. Very good, not too hard to craft, don't have to go out of your way, so just works really well. So final thoughts on this card. The effect is really good on paper. It's really good in theory, which I hope that I've made very clear, but the high crafting cost factors into its utility more so than other cards of the same nominal cost, right? Another card that costs 2 but is a different suit is going to be different purely because there's not that much stuff to craft with 2 mouse the way that there is for 2 foxes, right? There's Eyrie Emigre, 2 copies of Informants, 3 sword cards, and yeah, stuff like that, right? But with Master Engravers and Murine Broker, that's just 2 cards in the entire deck that you might get that require 2 mice, right? So, and its power declines the later you are in the game, because of course the items are slowly going to start disappearing from the supply, whether you crafted or someone else. But crafting this card turn 6, you might only get 1 use out of the card, and sure, a victory point's good, but just weigh that against how much effort it's going to take to get this card in the first place. If you're able to craft it with ease because you're the Woodland Alliance or someone, go for it. It's going to be fine. But, you know, if there's only 4 items left in the supply and your odds of getting it are quite low, don't bother maybe. Maybe use it for its suit. So it's one of those cards that has a very interesting decision of whether or not it's worthwhile to get in the first place, right? Get it if you can, but don't make it your primary plan, because aggressive opponents can also completely shut down your crafting engine depending on who you are, right? Oh, they have Master Engravers and no one has a Saboteur's card. What do? Well, let's just delete every crafting piece they have so that they can't craft in the first place. That is also a very doable strategy depending on your faction. So that's another thing to consider. So thank you very much. I hope that this was informative for you, and I will see you next time.